All right. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by David Eastwood. David, want to introduce yourself?
Perfect. Well, hello everyone. I'm David Eastwood. I run RevOps at Wiz, recently acquired by Google. So I've been there for 2 years. My background has firmly been in the RevOps sphere, from field ops to channel ops to post-sales ops. I've kind of done it all, and I'm really excited to be here talking to Jason today about that journey.
That's great. I think before we jump into the journey and the details and how you see the RevOps world progressing in the era of AI, David, why don't we start with how do we get to this conversation today?
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. I think the way to start here for me is I talk to a lot of tech companies, as does every RevOps leader. And I think the nature of a tech companies that you talk to has evolved over the last few years. So I get approached frequently by companies building go-to-market tools. I'm always quite selective about where I spend time, and I have to spend time with a company that really solves a problem for me. Revenue operations is evolving very fast, and we're going to talk about that today, especially over the last few years. It's really accelerated. And I think the way most organizations look at RevOps, the role is also changing. So they have to find and work with tools that go through that journey. And this is really where Aurasell comes in for me. It tackles a structural problem that we'll kind of talk about throughout today that almost every company is struggling with now. And we'll talk about the difference between platforms and vibe coding and everything as we discuss. And I think Aurasell kind of fits into this really nice role of being a platform across the whole go-to-market engine that solves a lot of the challenges that we face as RevOps leaders. And when Jason and I first connected, I was blown away by what he showed, and I said, hey, I'd love to get involved. I'd love to help. And that's how we've kind of ended up working together and hopefully selling in this whole journey to the RevOps world, because I'm really excited by this. And again, to put my name to something, I have to be excited. And Aurasell really does that. And I think some of the things that hopefully you guys will get to see today will also excite you as well.
I think it's a great opportunity for us to jump right in and talk about the role of AI and RevOps. So why don't we start with just thinking about how has RevOps changed in the last 10 years?
Yeah,
And
so I've
how do you see
actually
the role in AI changing RevOps moving forward?
So I'm going to answer the first part first because we were at our Wiz SKO last week and I had the opportunity to bring my whole team together and talk about this because I think it's something that's top of mind for every single RevOps individual. None of us are experts in RevOps, and this is very much a building the RevOps organization that works for the business that you work in. The way I describe it at a really simplistic level is that every go-to-market leadership individual that we work with has a hypothesis. And it's RevOps' job to take that hypothesis and test it. And effectively, if you prove it, you then continue. If it doesn't work very well, you reiterate. And I was talking about the leader that I work closely with at Wiz, and I've now been working with him for 25 quarters through Zscaler and Wiz. And the processes that we followed 25 quarters ago are very different to now. And part of that also comes along with how RevOps has evolved. So I've got a slide that I showed my team, and I'm going to set the scene right now. This is a Nano Banana slide for anyone that hasn't used Nano Banana and Gemini. This is not my own creation in terms of the content is mine, but you'll love the graphics. So let me share this really quickly just to get started. So hopefully this is showing on the screen now. So I've been in RevOps now for, it's longer than I can count, but at least 16 years in different roles. And I look back at that transition and it's interesting. My actual entry to RevOps was in systems. So this kind of RevOps 1 and RevOps 2 kind of are interchangeable, but originally RevOps kind of started out from what was a sales support. It then merged into a function where you looked at a little bit of the reporting. You provided value through reporting. You provided dashboards, visibility, and it's all how just to get that information up to the leader. It then evolved from there to look at systems. So this is kind of the Salesforce as the architecture behind everything. That system stack then exploded to the point where it became uncontrollable. As leaders started to see the value of RevOps, organizations pushed into this more of a business partner mindset, which is where a lot of companies are today. Not everyone's made it there yet, but that's really starting to take those insights and driving strategy from it. And that's where I talk about the hypothesis. But we're really at this point now where AI can help RevOps expand and become more of an orchestrator, an operator, should we say, where you can effectively, you understand the signals more than anyone else. You understand what is going on in the business more than anyone else. You are plugged in at a level that nobody else is. So how do you then take those signals and drive action from it? And that's really where kind of AI is going to help that evolution. It's like supporting, it turns all that raw data into insight. It removes the manual analysis. It helps us kind of understand the patterns that we miss. And something that we talk about within Wiz is you've got human speed and machine speed. There's only so fast humans can operate, and you can only add so many heads before the organization gets too heavy. Like, this is not about RevOps shrinking as an organization. This is about actually expanding the scope and the impact of revenue operations by utilizing and supporting what we're doing today. And it allows much faster decisions. It allows testing that hypothesis in a stronger way than we've ever done before, using multiple angles of data. And effectively it moves us from explaining what's happened to acting on what's happened. So really empowering our leaders in a way that we've never done before. And I think if we can all embrace the support of AI in a sensible way, and I think we should talk about that as well as part of this conversation, it can really take us from that journey of reporting and systems to being the team that operates the revenue system. And I think that's where Aurasell really fits in.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think your slide's spot on. There's a maturation going on through the progression of RevOps. I think your orchestrator term it has a dual meaning here. You know, to me, as we talk through the journey of you building teams, you building systems, you building processes, really the RevOps team is and will remain the orchestrator of business outcomes, in my opinion. And I think with AI native platforms like Aurasell, orchestrating the intelligent automation across signals, conversation, context, structured, unstructured data, executing workloads, agentic workloads on behalf of your really expensive resources in the business, those sellers and those customer facing teams and marketing and CS, combining that productivity with the productivity of autonomous agents, it doesn't change the definition of your team as a RevOps leader. It doesn't change the opportunity for your team to create impact for the organization. However, I do think it requires RevOps teams and RevOps leaders specifically to redefine how they create business impact.
Yes.
You want to expand on that, if you agree?
So I think the interesting thing here is I don't know a single RevOps individual who'll tell you, I've got loads of time. And I think this is where there's this balance. Like, the moment, what we're seeing is you see that typically most RevOps teams are stuck in kind of that table I showed you before between systems and business partnering, because there's heavy tool stacks, we've got fragmented data, we're maintaining infrastructure. Where you make it out of that stack, you then start to really add that true value, but we struggle with the strategic layer. And that's where it comes back to what you said is Aurasell allows you to accelerate to that point of being the strategic layer, and then allows you to spend more time focusing on outcomes, less time maintaining systems. So really driving that revenue performance. And I think one of the interesting things when you look at this is right now, to get a view of the business, most RevOps leaders end up going to lots of different tools, or they have lots of different orchestration layers. Even running them through data warehouses, sometimes getting all that data to come out in a way that works is very challenging. And if we've got something that can do that, it then gives that time back to be a strategic partner, to be the orchestrator, to be the operator, versus having to maintain the system, to maintain the infrastructure. It's a really different world. It's very easy to be scared about losing control of all of those tech stack, that whole tech stack. It's very easy to be scared about losing control of building every single dashboard. But actually, a dashboard is a reactive machine. It is not something that allows us to predict the business going forward. And in the pace of change, we really have to get to a point where we allow the systems to help us operate at that speed ahead of the curve. And that's what the leaders are looking for.
Let's talk about your maturation model. You had the if we went back to that slide just for reference for everyone as I frame this question.
Yeah, let me jump back there.
For those teams that might be stuck or or coming up on what you've defined as level 2 in that journey, RevOps 2.0 systems, where they're really focused on systems and stitching together those systems, kind of bridging across processes, business processes, and starting to get into some automation. And I see a lot of teams in this space, and they're really excited about vibe coding and using LLM connectors to all these disparate systems and processes. First of all, I guess if I could get you to expand on that as a trend that you see in the market, and then maybe we could talk about how does someone get from level 2 to level 4?
Okay, so let's start off with the first piece. There's a really interesting situation that I work for Wiz today. Wiz is obviously focused heavily on security and cloud security, and a lot of the things that we do is looking at what is going on within the kind of security layers. So something that I'm reading more and more about is a lot of companies jumping into utilizing LLMs, utilizing frameworks to run their business for them. The problem is, when you come to vibe coding, yes, by default, you can request the code to be secure, but you're operating with customer data, you're operating with connections and APIs that are built by a tool that doesn't necessarily understand all the risks that you're dealing with. The other side of that is, and something that Wiz is going to be heavily focused on over the next few months, is with the invention of AI pen testing, we're breaking into tools at a far faster speed than we've ever seen before. So the AI pen testing is finding vulnerabilities that a human pen tester couldn't in the past. So the biggest challenge that I face as a RevOps leader is, do I really want to be putting all of my trust into a tool that has been vibe coded and built by a team that hasn't been built necessarily from a security landscape? Yes, you can ask the tool to build a security mindset, but it's not the same level as going through the process of developing it from scratch as a platform. It doesn't necessarily have the same access controls and the same structure internally within your own networks, with your own systems. And the other piece of that is, how do you continue to maintain it? Vibe coding has a huge maintenance overhead. I talk to RevOps leaders who went really fast on the AI kind of transformation, invested in automation layers, some free, some paid for, and they got to a point 12 months later where they've lost control. They've either had complete system bloat, they've got processes they don't know what they're doing, context is no longer relevant because they're shooting notes left, right, and center to leaders, and it's just causing confusion. So I've operated much more on the, how do I do this in a measured approach where we're controlled, we make sure that the access, the data, the integrity of it, and the context is really focused on delivering value and taking very specific use cases. This is why I still believe in the platform approach. We really need to have enterprise data governance. There has to be clear access controls, and we have to have transparency and compliance within that. AI has to operate within a secure infrastructure, and I can't guarantee that from different vibe-coded apps. So I have to make sure I pick the right structure to protect the data that I'm working on. Like, if AI is operating the revenue engine, it has to be security as the foundation, and it's really critical. I know I spent a lot of time on that piece, but I think it's really important for this discussion.
Absolutely. And couldn't agree more. That's exactly why we give our customers the opportunity to leverage the power of intelligent AI automation across all signals and conversations and channels all the time. And we also give them the flexibility to build in custom AI enrichment and build custom AI agents and build custom AI workflows with just simple natural language prompts. So bringing that LLM-like experience to a natural language interaction that has the power to create agents, workflows, insights, and execution for custom enrichment on behalf of their team, but doing it in the safety of the confines of a purpose-built enterprise architecture, leveraging RBAC security controls in a SOC 2 compliant framework that is built for go-to-market to execute in a safe way across structured, unstructured data, leveraging the enterprise guardrails that you would expect from an enterprise class solution, but that has been trained for your specific business. And I think that's one of the things that you and I have been spending a lot of time talking about in the background. There is a lot of chatter on this adjacent to this discussion around, the need for a CRM or not a need for a CRM. Really this move toward the explosion of signals and context driving the new wave of go-to-market engagement. And so I would love to unpack your point of view on that.
Yeah, so just to wrap up what you just said is, I still believe there's a really strong place for a platform. And I think there's tools, they solve individual problems. And the problem is we still need a platform to unify everything. We can solve all the RevOps challenges by working with Claude Code and building lots of different things. But the problem is the scale of that and the maintenance and the intelligence across it. So a future stack isn't more tools. I think it's fewer platforms and having the right platform in place. So kind of coming to where you took that, and we should jump back in a bit to the RevOps, how you move between layers. Coming back to that piece, which is ultimately the CRM is basically a data warehouse. Let's be realistic. Salesforce is a data warehouse, and it can be a very painful data warehouse at times to deal with. And most of the tools that a traditional RevOps tech stack uses today layer on top of Salesforce. Now, I'm aware not in all situations can you do without Salesforce. It can do an extensive range of things. So there's two ways you could go. If I was to start from scratch now, from knowing what I know about Aurasell, I would start with Aurasell. I wouldn't start with Salesforce. I think it's the power to kind of make this job a lot simpler. But the world we live in, a lot of people have Salesforce, and that's the same situation I'm in today. We work with Salesforce. So it really, for me, at the moment, is about bringing in the right layer that allows us to understand behavioral signals. And that's the biggest, I say it's a trend, it's not really a trend, it's the fundamental evolution of the RevOps role. And it comes back to that, we're kind of threading here the same point, but it comes back to that point where, how do you move forward, which is ultimately signals drive behavior. And actually I have a slide to kind of talk about this, which I think is really important. A platform that is able to take a signal, that then understands the intent of that signal, drives an action and measures the outcome. That's fundamentally how I get my team and the people I work with to think about the role. And this is where the right layer comes into play. Is, as RevOps, we understand what those signals are. We can direct, whether it's through natural language or whatever the setup within the system, we can direct what we want those signals to be. We can then ultimately drive those actions out of it once we understand the intent. And those actions can be anything from just-in-time enablement to coaching conversations. It's like there's so many different things you can do. It could be renewal warnings, whatever that piece you want to do today that you run a report on and produce it manually. Aurasell can do it for you automatically, and it can do it based on the things that you want to drive and the signals that you understand. So AI in this case, in the Aurasell case, it builds the context around that data, which a Salesforce can't do today because it's just native to the platform. And I think that's what's really exciting. And again, back to what I said is, we don't all have the choice of dropping Salesforce, but if you can put something across Salesforce that simplifies the tool stack and gives you everything in one place, I would much rather have my leaders and my users running on one tool on one platform and being able to work with all their different peers, whether it's pre-sales, whether it's post-sales, in one place, and that the signals then go across the stack. Context is really important, and context that's consistent is even more powerful.
I 100% agree. And you are one of the very influential product advisors in our product advisory board who helped shape the direction of what we call the Aurasell go-to-market operating system, which is taking the same power and of intelligent automation and the same unified signal context layers that drive that automation, all the data that's available and through the internet and the power of the agents of the Aurasell platform, but layering it right on top of your existing CRM, like Salesforce in your case, or HubSpot and many others, and allowing you to keep that CRM for whatever reason makes sense to you, and then layering in intelligent automation on a unified data structure across structured, unstructured data, and then really having an AI native architecture drive the future direction of your go-to-market team, working hand in hand with that older legacy architecture. without the cost of switching and the security of, managed change through the process.
And I
So
think
thank you very much for your contribution on that product
well,
direction.
I'm excited to see what's to come as well. And I think the shift, just talking about that, really goes from we've moved from this kind of mindset of dashboards to an operating system. I love the word I was calling it revenue operating system, but actually I think you're right. And it's truly is an operating system. And it's taking us from analyzing after the fact to detecting signals in real time. And I think that's what you've built. And that's what allows a RevOps leader to become just that much more strategic partner to the sales leaders than anything we've ever seen before. Again, I think I've got another slide actually we can come to later around just some of the challenges here, but we do need to move from reporting to operating systems. We need to move from managing a tech stack to operating systems. And what you've built allows that growth and it allows that career progression. I think there's a lot of concern from people around, does AI remove the role of RevOps? Does platforms remove the role of RevOps? But if I look at my team are just driving more value now and are having more opportunity to have impactful conversations and spend more time across the different levels of leadership, which you're not able to do in the past.
It's a great point. That contrast between what role RevOps played in the past and the opportunity for RevOps in the future is one that I think is important. A lot of people are talking about go-to-market engineers in the RevOps space and how and they're it's a great role. It's an expensive role, and oftentimes they're working on kind of stitching together all of these tools. When I think about that, I think about first looking at the AI native architecture of the solutions or the platform that you choose to build on should be automated enough that it should not require engineering in the field. However, it should be flexible enough and robust enough that it provides and unleashes the power of AI automation with AI customization. And I think there's a unique role there, and I'm not sure if it's going to be called go-to-market engineering or what name it will end up being called, what label we will give it as an industry. But this idea of RevOps as an orchestrator of business outcomes, I really continue to kind of think about that all the time, and I think it gets the RevOps teams back to where they originally started decades ago. Right? If you think about it, to me, I think the RevOps teams of the last 10 years have become the infrastructure CIOs of the go-to-market business. And not because they wanted to, not because the CRO said, I need to hire a CIO. It's out of necessity of the complexity of the ecosystem of the go-to-market ecosystem and the tooling's lack of automation and overly cumbersome integration and very fragile ecosystem. I think it's time for a needed change for RevOps people as a community to break their identity away from that complexity and start thinking more strategically about how do we create and maximize business impact in an ongoing, iterative way.
So it's interesting you mentioned go-to-market engineer because that actually somewhat diminishes the strategic role of a true RevOps business partner or whatever kind of role they carry within the RevOps sphere. And the reason being is that a RevOps operator doesn't just manage the tools or the infrastructure, they run the system. And I think the important thing is it's like we should be focusing on signals, we shouldn't be focusing on building reports, we shouldn't be reducing the infrastructure we have to manage. The concept of engineering, unfortunately, implies that actually that you have to still do all of that. You're still building a lot. The platform approach we talk about, it services it already. Yes, there's always going to be some configuration. There's going to be some natural language prompts in there. There's going to be some architecture in there, and you'll always need those. But if we're engineering everything, we actually create tech debt. And I think that's some of the interesting journeys that I'm seeing. Again, I talked to operators who went really early and with a number of different tools. And again, I'm going to be tool agnostic in that sense, is that the tech debt that's built up over the last 12 months, that they don't even know some of the flows and different workflows that have been happening and what they're doing, and they're kind of getting to a point where it's just unmanageable. So while you have the engineers managing that, it's not often linked back to the value or the outcome you're trying to drive. So coming back to that signals, intent, action, outcome piece, everything that you do has to come with what is the outcome we're trying to drive. Back to the hypothesis conversation from the beginning. What is the hypothesis you're trying to solve here? So if you're always just engineering and building, you create this sprawl without really ever connecting it back to that end state and the value you can drive as an operator. So I think the operator or the orchestrator, whatever that kind of world looks like, is much more of a holistic role. But to do that, it requires a platform that's ready to service rather than you having to configure and build everything. So I know I might be outspoken in this one, and not everyone's going to agree with me on this, but I'm not in a world where I want to construct lots of different models and code together to build myself a system, because I see my value as delivering insights and actions to the leadership team, which means I need a platform ready to go. If I spend all of my time engineering and building, my value as a strategic partner disappears. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. If you were to boil it down, how does the business measure that value? Let's boil it down to 2 or 3 KPIs. If you said, hey, this is the value that the RevOps team is going to deliver to the business, and you can find it in these 2 or 3 KPIs, what would it be?
That's a really good question. You caught me on that one. So I think there's a few really important things I would talk about there, and let me process that question for a second. But ultimately, we have to decide, depending on where you're hitting. So let's focus more on the kind of the lead to cash motion for a second, right? So if you look at the lead to cash motion, assuming everyone runs to a sales process, it's the speed that you go through that sales process, so the velocity of that sales process, and how you could impact. For me, the outcome there is reducing the velocity or increasing the velocity of the sales process by empowering first line managers to run their teams in a far more efficient way. First line managers are the least supported but most important role in sales. A controversial statement, I'm sure. I said the same thing about SE managers. The most influential but least cared about and supported role. So number one, the KPI for me is how you drive velocity by supporting those teams, whether it's velocity to the sales process or it's velocity and insights around the POV for the SE teams. So it's making sure that we can measure that. That's a fundamental piece. The other will be around productivity. So how are we looking at productivity, whether it comes through territory setup, quota setup, the customization and understanding of the market, whether it's the ICP data that allows you to build a territory, to build your ultimate TAM within the accounts. So getting that information in there and making sure that we're driving some level of productivity uplift by configuring the business in a successful way. That's another really key value for RevOps. And then the final piece for that for me is maybe a little bit more intangible, but it's actually, I always say one line, and it's very cheesy, but it's like, the sales leaders I work with, their job is to take care of employees, partners, and customers. And my job is to take care of everything else. Are we empowering those leaders to do that by giving them all the information so they can ensure the rest of the internal business is running, but actually they're able to take care of all the things that really matter to them? It's harder to kind of quantify that based on this conversation, the question you asked. But to do that, a RevOps person needs something that they can real time. Again, I come back to the human speed versus computer speed. If a leader's waiting for human speed, they end up getting more involved in the business that they shouldn't be doing, less involved in the things that they should be doing. So it's that kind of balance between what split of time is your leader spending on internal activities because the data is not there, or they're reading a dashboard, or they're trying to understand it at PowerPoint slides, like, versus moving them to, hey, go spend time in the field. So less measurable, but very critical.
Yeah. In the last 10 years, you have built 2 of the most valuable software companies in the industry, Wiz and Zscaler. You've done so with one of the best operators in the industry. That's Dolly Rajic, who I had the pleasure of working with years ago at BMC. And I know Dolly well enough to know that he thinks through the operational lens, specifically with a nod toward driving operational excellence all the time. How has that been for you to work with an operator like that, as the right hand driving the operational team that supports operational excellence.
First thing I'll say is we're very lucky that he truly understands the value of operations. Like that both at Zscaler and at Wiz, we've been fully invested in to build a true operating infrastructure, to have a RevOps organization that's grouped together that removes silos. So having every operational aspect of the business in one team versus in pockets. And you see that a lot still in the industry where RevOps is really segmented across different roles and teams. That really empowers us to break silos and to coming back to that operating system conversation. It's an end-to-end operating system because we're all connected. So the empowering of that makes a significant difference. The other piece that's been huge is that because of the value that we've been able to drive through these relationships, my team are seen as peers to their partners in the field. And that's a very different conversation. So my field ops teams, my post-sales, my channel ops teams, they're seen as a peer where they're actively encouraged to challenge the leaders. They're actively encouraged to bring insights and analysis and opinions and say, actually, the signal we're seeing says this. We don't necessarily agree. Let's discuss it. And those are constructive conversations because we're empowered. We have the access to the information and it allows us to make much more strategic decisions, but also allows us to move a little bit quicker because we're not having to go through the steps of, okay, I need to present something to somebody that is not necessarily in my chain of command or my structure. Like it's a much more unified operating system. We work together, we are peers, we operate together. And if you talk to any of the team that I work with, like they're ultimately empowered to make those decisions based on the data, the information that they have, and to drive things forward at pace. People are empowered to improve the world we live in because operations is perceived to be equal in standing, and it makes a significant difference. I know I'm very privileged to be in that position. Not everyone has that same opportunity, and I think using tools like Aurasell for those teams that are maybe struggling to kind of be on parity will allow you to start to put yourself into that strategic layer where you bring those insights and you challenge the status quo you're operating in. And I think this is where it's very easy to construct and build a massive tech stack with lots of custom things in there. That's not necessarily adding the value that you're looking for. Being very agile and lean and able to then drive and spend your time on strategic projects and initiatives to bring value is a much better way to, as a RevOps leader, to spend time. And that's where we've got to, which is exciting. I joke that 50% of my time is probably not doing RevOps. And maybe that's not a great thing to say, but I'm actually heavily involved in across the business because the value that RevOps brings through the setup that we have allows us to have input and direction and drive direction on many different topics. And that's what's really exciting about getting to a point where you have the tools, the tech stack, the reporting engines, the teams set up in this mentality around pushing and driving forward around signals.
Yeah. I love hearing you say that. You know, we were taught back in the day as sales leaders that key KPI that really matters is productive capacity.
Yes.
And today, and probably in the future moving forward, that isn't just a measurement of productive sales capacity by the number of people, revenue divided by number of people carrying quota, or the full cost of sell when you think about, marketing and CS and everything that goes into customer acquisition and onboarding. But I think really in the future, it involves agents. It's the cost of your AI credits, your autonomous agents that are executing, go-to-market workloads on your behalf. But I still think the principle holds, which is that single. I look at my as a 20-year go-to-market executive. I've always looked at my VP or SVP of global operations and strategy as a right hand to me, like that relationship that you have with Dolly. I think there's a lot of mutual respect there, not just for me, but throughout the organization for her and her team. And it does permeate from the top down, I think, in these org structures. And, when it comes back to that question of which KPI matters the most is a single thing that you have to measure. And I think it still comes down to measuring business value through the lens of maximizing top line and efficiency, and the way to do that in a single KPI is really through productive capacity, although capacity could be the humans in go-to-market plus the agents plus the spend. I mean, you could define that differently. I still think it comes down to maximizing productivity. And I think otherwise you get caught up in chasing, the potential to chase one over the other. More top line at the expense of efficiency, more efficiency at the expense of growth. I think really that balance is the ultimate way to build great companies. You and Dolly have done a fantastic job at that, better than anybody. So congratulations. And I think we close out maybe the session with just sharing, going back to that question that we asked before. You've gone through the evolution. You are driving excellence in execution. You are adopting organizational structures, processes, and AI native technologies. For somebody who's listening today, who looked at your slide earlier and said, I buy into David's approach, having a moment of self-reflection, understanding that they may be stuck at that level 2 maturity, where's their path to getting started and accelerating the journey to level 4 quickly?
Yeah, so let me share one final slide to kind of wrap up, which is, I think it's really important to embrace that AI is going to accelerate everything. I think this gives you the superpower that you need, but it's a superpower that you have to use carefully. It'll help you drive automation. It'll help you bring faster insights. It's going to help you produce different sorts of collateral and drive things like that. But if you use it and overuse it, signal overload is a real problem. Signal overload does not drive strategic relationships and conversations. It's very easy to fall foul of data leakage and data control and just get to a point where your tech stack is unmanageable. So if you truly want to break into that layer, it's about focusing on some really tight signals that matter to your leaders, turning those signals into really actionable items that drive predetermined outcomes that you are looking as a business to a lot. So it's really important before you even start this, like, what are the KPIs that matter to you? We talked about a couple of KPIs. We have a host of strategic KPIs that we manage to as an organization. What signals impact those KPIs? You understand the signals. Everyone in your team understands the signals that matter and work back from them. Don't try and do too much. Don't go full tilt into AI. Focus on a platform that works for you. I'm not saying that AI is not going to drive everything. It just needs to be done with caution so that you don't overwhelm the teams that you work with, so that you don't create tech debt, system bloat, and you almost undo everything that you're working towards. And this is also, getting back to why I said why I put my name to Aurasell. I think Aurasell will help you get there. I really would encourage any of you who haven't seen it to have a demo. I think my first impression, it blew me away, and I've been talking to the team now for about 5 to 6 months. And every single time I have a conversation, the new functionality they add, it's things that are far faster than I've seen other people build. They're built out better than I've seen other people do. And I really think it will change the conversations that you have with your leaders, and will really allow you to accelerate to that next level within your organization.
Well, thank you, David. Your insights are invaluable. I hope everyone has enjoyed the opportunity to sit down with you for 40 minutes with me as your host, to at least bring some of these insights out. And if they wanted to engage with you somewhere else to follow up with any clarifying questions or direction, how would they do that?
Please do. Best bet is through LinkedIn. Always happy to reach out and talk to peers alike. I'm always happy to also open to other opinions, because I'm very aware, and I say this to my team, and I think my team really believe this, is my opinion is one opinion. People who work for me in each of the different pillars of RevOps, they are far more experienced in their area than I am. So just because I have an opinion doesn't mean it's the only way, doesn't mean it's the right way. And I love to have those conversations. And with RevOps, you have to continuously evolve. You have to change your thinking. I may decide tomorrow to have a different perspective based on all the insights and data, but it's a data-driven decision. So I love a conversation, I love a debate, and I look forward to meeting more of you as we go through this journey.
Great. And if you're watching here now and you'd like to join us in person for that conversation, or as David has invited, a debate, in May, you can find us in London. Well, details will be out for any community events that might be coming to your town near you. Thank you again, David. Really appreciate the time. We'll talk soon.